You have her eyes. Thomas Harrison's words cut through the air like a sharp blade, freezing Sarah Parker in the middle of the routine procedure. The heart monitor beside the bed registered a sudden spike in the patient's heartbeat, but it wasn't the only heart racing in the room. Sarah felt her own pulse quicken, though she couldn't explain why. Cedar Grove Hospital had its own share of stories about coincidences and intertwined destinies, but nothing came close to what was about to unfold in room 507. Sarah, who had spent years wondering about her origins, had no idea that her first day as a private nurse to one of the most powerful men on the East Coast would also mark the beginning of a journey to answer the questions that had haunted her since childhood. The photograph Thomas held in his trembling hands showed a young woman with long brown hair and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the image. There was something hypnotic about that face, something painfully familiar that made her chest tighten. Who is she?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Thomas could respond, the sound of high heels clicking against the marble hallway announced the arrival of Victoria Harrison. She swept into the room like a gust of icy wind, her expensive perfume arriving a moment before her imposing presence. With a swift and deliberate motion, Victoria snatched the photograph from her husband's hands and tucked it into her designer handbag. "Thomas needs his rest now," Victoria declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Sarah, darling, why don't you go check on your other patients?" But Sarah couldn't move. Something about the way Victoria had reacted, the urgency with which she had hidden the photograph, awakened an instinct within Sarah that she didn't even know she had. It was as if every fiber of her being was screaming that the image held a crucial piece of her own story. The weeks that followed became an exercise in patience and observation. Sarah began noticing patterns, how Victoria always appeared whenever Thomas seemed on the verge of revealing something important, how his eyes would fill with tears when he thought no one was watching, how he would spend hours gazing out the hospital window as if searching for something, or someone, amid the bustling streets below. One night, while organizing Thomas's medications, Sarah found a yellowed envelope tucked between the pages of a book on the bedside table. Her name, her full name, was handwritten on the front in elegant script she recognized as Thomas's. "You've always been curious, even as a baby," Thomas's voice startled her. He was awake, watching her with a mixture of sadness and something that looked like hope. "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. "How could you possibly know what I was like as a baby?" Thomas struggled to sit up in bed, his movements slow and labored, revealing the weight of his 75 years. "There's so much I need to tell you, Sarah. So much you need to know." The sound of the door opening interrupted the moment of revelation once again. But this time it wasn't Victoria who entered the room. It was Dr. Matthews, his expression serious. "Mr. Harrison, we need to run some urgent tests," he announced, casting a meaningful glance at Sarah. "Nurse Parker, please prepare the patient for transport." As she helped prepare Thomas for the tests, Sarah felt something being discreetly pressed into her hand, the envelope she had found moments earlier. Thomas's eyes met hers, silently conveying a clear message. It was time for the truth to come out. That night, alone in her small apartment, Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside she found two documents that would change her life forever, a DNA test and an old birth certificate. The tears started to fall before she even finished reading the contents. The woman in the photograph had a name, Catherine Parker. And according to the documents in Sarah's hands, she was her biological mother. But what truly turned her world upside down was the other revelation, the name listed under father on the birth certificate, Thomas Harrison. The weight of this discovery hit her like a tidal wave, bringing more questions than answers. Why had she been abandoned? What had happened to her mother? And why was Victoria so determined to keep this secret buried? Sarah spent the night wide awake, the words from the documents swirling in her mind like fragments of a nightmare she couldn't escape. By the time the sun rose, she had made her decision. She needed to confront Thomas and uncover the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. What she didn't know was that Victoria Harrison had also spent the night awake, meticulously planning her next moves. In her opulent office, surrounded by photographs that told a carefully curated story of a perfect family, Victoria held another set of documents. Documents that painted a very different picture, a story of betrayal, death, and a secret she had been guarding for more than 2 decades. Fate had placed Sarah Parker in room 507 of Cedar Grove Hospital for a reason. And as the city woke to another day, the gears of a long-buried truth began to turn, threatening to unravel not only the carefully constructed facade of the Harrison family but also to expose a crime Victoria believed had been left in the past. Sarah's journey to uncover her origins was just beginning, and the price of the truth would be far higher than she could have ever imagined. The breakfast on Sarah's small apartment table remained untouched. The documents she had uncovered the night before were spread out in front of her, every word printed on them seeming to pulse with the weight of 2 decades of secrets. Her mind kept circling back to the photograph Victoria had snatched from Thomas's hands. The woman in the portrait, Catherine Parker, her biological mother. The bathroom mirror revealed what Sarah had been trying to deny. The same green eyes, the same delicate shape of her face, even the way her brown hair fell in soft waves. For years, she had searched for her origins in the faces of strangers on the streets, and now she was discovering that her past was tied to one of the most influential men in the city. "I need to focus," she murmured to herself, adjusting her hospital uniform. But her hands trembled as she tried to fasten the buttons. When Sarah arrived at Cedar Grove Hospital that morning, she immediately sensed that something was different. Victoria Harrison was standing by the nursing station, speaking in low tones with Dr. Matthews. When their eyes met, Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "Sarah dear," Victoria called, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Could we talk in private?" Before Sarah could respond, Victoria led her into a small meeting room. The older woman's expensive perfume felt suffocating in the confined space. "I found something interesting in your references," Victoria began, her tone deceptively casual. "It seems there was an incident at your last job. Something about incorrect medication?" Sarah felt her blood run cold. The incident had been completely cleared up, a mix-up of patient records that hadn't even caused any harm. But the way Victoria presented the information sounded like a veiled threat. "It was a misunderstanding, Mrs. Harrison. All the documents prove my innocence." "Oh, I'm sure it was," Victoria smiled, her eyes as cold as ice. "But you know how rumors are in hospitals. Sometimes even the smallest suspicion can ruin a promising career." The message was clear. Victoria knew something about the documents Thomas had handed Sarah. As Sarah left the meeting room, she found Annie, one of the hospital's longest-serving nurses, waiting for her in the hallway. The older woman seemed nervous, glancing around before pulling Sarah into a discreet corner. "I worked here when your mother died," Annie whispered, her words falling like bombs in the silence of the corridor. "Catherine was a nurse here too. She didn't die in a car accident like they say." The world seemed to spin around Sarah. How do you know this?" "Because I was on call that night," Annie continued, her voice trembling. "Catherine found out something about Victoria, something serious. The next day they said she had an accident, but..." The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. Dr. Matthews was approaching quickly, his expression concerned. "Sarah, I need you in room 507 immediately. Mr. Harrison is having a crisis." Racing down the hallway, Sarah found Thomas in visible distress, his breathing irregular and the heart monitor sounding alarming alerts. Victoria was nowhere to be seen. "Sarah," Thomas managed to say between labored breaths, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "The safe, office at home, evidence?" "Don't strain yourself, Mr. Harrison," Sarah urged, quickly checking his vital signs. But Thomas wouldn't let go of her hand. "Victoria, He tried to continue, but his words were interrupted by a violent coughing fit. At that moment, the emergency team burst into the room, and Sarah was forced to step aside. Watching the doctor's work, she realized that the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, forming an increasingly darker picture. That night after her shift, Sarah drove to the Harrison mansion. She knew it was risky, but Thomas's and Annie's words echoed in her mind. The entrance security recognized Sarah as Thomas's nurse and, after a brief call to confirm with Victoria, allowed her entry. The mansion was a monument to the wealth and power of the Harrisons, with its endless corridors decorated with valuable artwork. Victoria received Sarah in the library, a glass of red wine in her perfectly manicured hands. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise," she smiled, but her eyes remained watchful. "Did you come for something in particular?" "Yes," Sarah replied, gathering all her courage. "I came to seek the truth about my mother." Victoria's smile faltered for a moment. "Your mother? Oh, you must be referring to those ridiculous documents Thomas gave you. Dear, do you really believe that my husband, in his debilitated state, is a reliable source of information? The DNA tests don't lie, Mrs. Harrison." "DNA?" Victoria laughed, a cold and humorless sound. "And where are these tests now, Sarah?" With horror, Sarah realized that the documents she had left in her apartment were gone. Victoria must have noticed her shocked expression as her smile widened. "You know, Sarah, some truths are better left buried. for the sake of everyone involved. The sound of glass shattering from upstairs made both of them glance at the ceiling. Victoria paled. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, placing the wine glass on the table and quickly leaving the library. Alone, Sarah noticed something familiar about the wine glass, a dark red lipstick stain on the rim, the same shade her mother used to wear in the old photograph. Her gaze drifted across the library, landing on a small safe partially hidden behind a painting. Thomas's words echoed in her mind, the safe, home office, evidence. Sarah knew she had only a few minutes before Victoria returned. What she would find there could finally reveal the truth about her mother's fate, or seal her own. The safe in the Harrisons' library held more than documents, it held the weight of 2 decades of silence. With trembling hands, Sarah turned the dial, recalling the sequence of numbers she had once seen Thomas enter absent-mindedly in his hospital room, Catherine's birth date. Each number pressed seemed to reverberate in the oppressive silence of the library. The mechanism gave way with a soft click, revealing its contents like a Pandora's box about to be opened. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her mind replaying the events that had led her here. Thomas's look of recognition, Victoria's veiled threats, Annie's urgent words. There was no turning back now. Inside the safe, an old, worn shoebox immediately caught her attention. As she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. There it was, her story, preserved in fragments of paper and memories. A red leather-bound diary, several old photographs carefully organized by date, and a USB drive that seemed out of place among so many relics of the past. Sarah picked up one of the photos gently, as if holding a fragile butterfly. Catherine was beaming in her Cedar Grove nurse's uniform, holding Thomas in a warm embrace in front of the hospital. The love in his eyes was unmistakable, so different from the bitter man Sarah had known in room 507. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten message made her eyes fill with tears. "We will always be a family no matter what happens. With eternal love, Catherine." Other photographs told a silent story. Catherine, pregnant, lovingly caressing her belly with a serene smile. Thomas and her at a picnic in the park, their hands intertwined on the green grass. Stolen moments in the hospital corridors, exchanging knowing glances. In each image, love overflowed, making Sarah's heart ache for something she had never known. The sound of footsteps in the hallway abruptly pulled her out of her contemplation. With quick, precise movements, Sarah tucked the diary and the USB drive into her bag, placed the photos back in the box, and closed the safe. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard from the other side of the door. Victoria entered the library like a queen in her domain, each movement calculated to demonstrate control. "Sorry for the delay," she smiled, but her eyes scanned the room like a radar, searching for signs of intrusion. "Where were we?" "You were going to tell me about my mother," Sarah replied, feeling the weight of the items in her bag like an anchor tying her to the truth. She watched Victoria move around the room, noticing for the first time how every gesture seemed rehearsed, as if she were constantly playing a part. Victoria poured herself more wine, her movements deliberately slow, like a predator assessing its prey. "You know, Sarah, your mother was complicated. A woman who didn't understand her place in the world." She paused, swirling the wine in her glass with studied indifference. "She worked here as a nurse when she met Thomas. He always had a soft spot for lost causes." Rage rose up Sarah's throat like bile. "Catherine was not a lost cause," she retorted, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "She was a respected professional, dedicated to her patients. Annie told me how loved she was by everyone at the hospital." The mention of Annie caused something to shift in Victoria's eyes. For a brief moment, the mask of civility slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Annie?" she cut in, her face hardening. "That old gossip still works at the hospital? Interesting." Sarah's phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Annie that made her blood run cold. "Don't trust her. I have the security camera footage from that night. Meet me at the cafe on the corner of the hospital. Now, it's about Catherine's death." "I have to go," Sarah said, standing up abruptly. "My shift starts in an hour." Victoria followed her to the door, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Be careful on your way, dear. The streets can be dangerous at night. Just like they were when your mother had that terrible accident." The barely concealed threat in Victoria's words followed Sarah all the way to her car. Only when she was a few blocks away did she allow herself to breathe normally. She turned on the radio to try to calm her nerves, but an urgent news bulletin sliced through the music like a knife. "Breaking news. Retired nurse from Cedar Grove Hospital found unconscious after apparent robbery attempt. The victim was discovered in the parking lot of a cafe near the hospital." Sarah's world began to spin. And her only link to the past, the only person who seemed willing to tell the truth, had been silenced. At the hospital, chaos reigned. Annie had been rushed in with a serious head injury that looked anything but accidental. Found in the cafe parking lot, a paramedic explained, avoiding eye contact with Sarah. Bags stolen, no documents or personal belongings found. Sarah ran to Thomas's room, desperate to share her findings, to ask for help, guidance, anything. But she found only an empty, neatly made bed, as if he had never been there. Mr. Harrison was transferred to the ICU, a nurse with a worried expression informed her. Direct order from Mrs. Harrison. Only family allowed to visit. That night, in her apartment, Sarah opened her mother's diary with trembling hands. The yellowed pages held more than just memories, they were a testimony, a confession, a cry for help through time. Catherine had meticulously documented everything in her diary. Each page revealed not only the dark secrets of the Harrisons, but also the deep love of a mother for her daughter. My dear Sarah, today you would be 5 years old. As I write these words, I imagine what your smile would be like, the sound of your laughter echoing through the halls of our home. The pain of not being with you is like a wound that never fully heals. But I've discovered something terrible. The hospitals under the Harrison Foundation have a disturbing pattern of natural deaths among wealthy patients. Victoria is behind this. Falsified documents, altered wills, fortunes mysteriously disappearing. Thomas has no idea. She keeps everything hidden from him, manipulating his trust just as she manipulates everything around her. The weight of this discovery is suffocating. Every hallway in the hospital now holds shadows, every corner hides potential threats. Victoria cornered me today in the parking lot, her gentle smile contrasting with the threat in her words. Accidents happen every day, Catherine. It would be a shame if something happened to that little orphan you protect so much. Sarah had to stop reading, her hands shaking too much to hold the diary. Her mother had died trying to protect her. Every moment of loneliness in her childhood, every unanswered question about her origins, all had been a sacrifice of love. Continuing the reading, she found the last entry, dated the fateful day. My love, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. Victoria discovered everything, the money, the deaths, the frauds. The Harrison Foundation is not what it seems. It is a front for something much more sinister. Thomas knows nothing, he is as much a victim as I am. Victoria keeps him sedated, controlled, using his illness as an excuse to take control of everything. But I've left evidence on the flash drive. Financial records, emails, recordings of conversations. Evidence she couldn't destroy. I'm so scared, my little one. Not for myself, but for you. Victoria made it clear today that if I told Thomas anything, you would pay the price. So, I did the only thing I could to protect you. I gave you up for adoption, erasing any trace that could link you to me or the Harrisons. But I left clues, breadcrumbs of truth that would one day lead you back home. Thomas will eventually figure it all out. And when that happens, he will find you. Forgive me for not being strong enough to fight. Forgive me for leaving you. Every day away from you has been a torture that words cannot describe. But know that every decision, every sacrifice, was made out of love. I love you forever, Mom. Sarah's phone rang, cutting through the silence like a razor. It was Dr. Matthews, his voice thick with urgency. Sarah, you need to come now. Thomas is different. He stopped taking the medication Victoria prescribed, and he's more lucid than I've seen him in years. He's asking for you, talking about Catherine, about the truth. I'm on my way, Sarah replied, already grabbing her keys. There's one more thing. The doctor hesitated. Annie, she didn't make it. But before the end, she gave me something for you. A flash drive. She said it was about the night your mother died. The world seemed to slow down around Sarah. Annie had died protecting the truth just like her mother. How many more lives was Victoria willing to destroy to keep her secrets? As she drove back to the hospital, her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the knuckles turned white. Her mother's journal and the flash drives weighed in her bag like anchors, connecting the past and the present. Annie had sacrificed her life to help her uncover the truth. Catherine had died protecting her. Now it was her turn to fight. For all of them. What Sarah didn't know was that Victoria was also on her way to the hospital, her high heels echoing down the empty halls as she made her way to the pharmacy in the restricted wing. In her designer bag, an empty syringe waited to be filled, the same method she had used 20 years ago, when Catherine threatened to expose her secrets. The race against time had begun, and this time, more than just the truth was at stake. Thomas's life, the last witness who could confirm Catherine's story, hung by a thread. Night was falling over Cedar Grove Hospital like a heavy cloak of secrets. Sarah ran through the hallways lit by fluorescent lights, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the cold walls. In her bag, Catherine's journal and the flash drive seemed to pulse with the urgency of long-silenced truths. Dr. Matthews waited for her at the entrance of the ICU, his face marked by concern and sleepless nights. "Thomas is asking for you," he whispered, looking nervously over his shoulder. He stopped taking the medications Victoria prescribed 3 days ago. It's like a fog has lifted from his mind. Through the ICU glass, Sarah saw Thomas sitting on his bed, more alert than she had ever seen him. His eyes, once clouded by constant medication, now shone with an eerie clarity. Upon seeing her, his face lit up with a smile that made Sarah's heart tighten. It was the same smile from the photographs with Catherine. "My girl," he said as soon as she entered the room, his voice thick with emotion. "I can finally see you clearly. You're exactly like her." Sarah held his trembling hand, feeling the years of distance and secrets melting between their intertwined fingers. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. Thomas closed his eyes, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Victoria, she kept me in a prison of pills and lies. She said Catherine died in a car accident, that that you hadn't survived either. I was so sedated I could barely tell reality from nightmare." His words were interrupted by a fit of coughing. When he recovered, his eyes had a feverish urgency. "But I knew deep in my heart something was wrong. The increasing doses of medication, the complications Victoria always said I had. It was all part of her plan." Sarah took Catherine's journal out of her bag, her hands trembling. "I found this in the mansion's safe. Mom." She discovered something about Victoria, about the Foundation's hospitals. "The patients," Thomas murmured, his face paling. "All those rich patients who died mysteriously. Catherine discovered the truth, didn't she?" Sarah nodded, flipping through the journal to the last entry. Victoria was behind it all. Manipulating wills, diverting fortunes. "Mom found out and tried to tell you, but Victoria threatened her. Threatened to hurt me if she said anything." Thomas let out a distressed sound, somewhere between a sob and a groan. "Your mother? She was the bravest woman I ever knew. When we fell in love, Victoria was already showing signs of her controlling nature, but I was too blind to see it. Catherine brought light into my life, showed me what true love was." He paused, gathering strength. "When she found out she was pregnant, her eyes shone like stars. We made plans, dreamed of a life together. I was going to divorce Victoria, start fresh. But then, the accident," Sarah finished softly. "That was never an accident," Thomas said, his voice now heavy with suppressed anger. "That night, Catherine called me, saying she had discovered something terrible about Victoria. We arranged to meet at the hospital, but she never arrived. When I got the news about the accident, Victoria was by my side, holding a syringe. 'To calm your nerves,' she said. And then, darkness. Years and years of darkness." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place in a terrifying way. Annie tried to tell me the truth. She had proof, recordings from that night. And now Annie is dead, a cold voice cut through the air. Victoria stood in the doorway, her high heels silent against the hospital floor. In her right hand, a syringe gleamed menacingly under the fluorescent lights. "Did you really think you could expose everything like this?" Victoria laughed, a humorless sound that echoed off the walls of the room. "That you could just dig up the past and destroy everything I've built? You killed my mother," Sarah accused, instinctively positioning herself between Victoria and Thomas. "You killed Annie. How many more people, Victoria? How many lives have you destroyed for money?" "I built an empire," Victoria hissed, her eyes shining with cold fury. "I turned the Harrison Foundation into a powerhouse. While Thomas was falling for nurses and dreaming of true love, I created something bigger than all of us." She took a step forward, the syringe raised. Catherine was weak. She didn't understand that sometimes sacrifices are necessary. Those patients, they were just pieces on a bigger board. And you, Sarah, you're exactly like your mother. Idealistic. Foolish. Doomed to the same fate. Thomas's heart monitor began to beep frantically. Sarah could feel the panic rising in her chest, but she stood firm. In her bag, Annie's flash drive and Catherine's journal weighed like anchors of truth. "It's over, Victoria," Sarah declared, her voice trembling but determined. "The evidence isn't just with me. Annie made sure the truth came to light, no matter what happened to her." Victoria hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Before she died, Annie sent copies of everything to the police. Sarah responded, her voice gaining strength. The security camera footage from the night my mother died, the financial records, everything. She knew you'd try to silence her, so she made sure the truth survived. Victoria's face drained of color. For the first time, Sarah saw fear in the eyes of the woman who had destroyed so many lives. You don't understand, Victoria whispered, her mask of control beginning to crack. I did all of this for power. When I met Thomas, he was just another idealistic doctor with a small foundation. I turned him into someone important. I built an empire. At the cost of innocent lives, Thomas spoke, his voice weak but firm. At the cost of our love, Victoria. Catherine showed me what true happiness was, and you couldn't stand to see that. She was going to destroy everything. Victoria screamed, her composure finally shattering. That insignificant nurse, with her noble ideals and morality, she found out about the patients, about the money. She threatened to expose everything. Sarah took a step forward, feeling a strength she didn't know she had. My mother was everything you could never be, Victoria. She had integrity, compassion, true love. That's why you killed her. Not for money or power, but because she had something you could never have. Victoria lunged with the syringe, but her movements were uncoordinated from rage. Sarah managed to dodge, and the syringe fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. At that moment, Dr. Matthews entered the room, accompanied by 2 police officers. It's over, Mrs. Harrison, he said firmly. We received the evidence Annie sent. And there's more. Toxicology reports from Mr. Harrison showing years of forced sedation, altered records, witnesses to the accidents at the hospitals. As the officers handcuffed Victoria, who screamed and struggled, Sarah turned to Thomas. He was crying quietly, years of pain and guilt finally finding release. Forgive me, he whispered, holding Sarah's hand. Forgive me for not being strong enough to protect you and your mother. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, letting her own tears flow freely. There's nothing to forgive. Victoria stole 20 years from us, but she can't hurt us anymore. Now we can be the family we should have been. The sunrise began to tint the horizon with shades of pink and gold, its soft colors streaming through the windows of the hospital. It was a new day, a new beginning. Sarah gazed at her mother's journal, thinking about how Catherine had sacrificed everything to keep her safe. Your mother would be proud of you, Thomas said gently, following her gaze. She always said that true love finds its way no matter how long it takes. Sarah smiled through her tears, feeling as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally set everyone free. Victoria would face justice for her crimes, and the ghosts of the past could finally rest. Let's go home, she said to Thomas, helping him sit up. We have so much time to make up for, so many stories to share. And so, father and daughter left Cedar Grove Hospital together, carrying with them the legacy of love and courage left by Catherine. The empire Victoria had built with lies and death would crumble, but something stronger would rise from the ruins. A family reunited, a love rediscovered, and the promise of a new dawn. The final words in Catherine's journal seemed to echo in the air. True love always finds its way back home. The Harrison mansion looked different under the morning light. Sarah watched the golden rays of the sun dance through the stained glass windows as she helped Thomas settle into his favorite chair in the library. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria's arrest, and each day brought new discoveries, small fragments of a life that could have been. This was her favorite place, Thomas said softly, his eyes scanning the bookshelves that reached up to the ceiling. Catherine would spend hours here, reading to you while you were still in her belly. She said you'd be a book lover just like us. Sarah sat on the arm of the chair, feeling the bittersweet weight of memories she never had. How did you two meet? Tell me everything, Dad. I want to know every detail of her story, of our story. Thomas closed his eyes, a soft smile playing on his lips. It was right here in the hospital. I was doing my night rounds when I found Catherine singing to a terminal patient. She had this unique ability to bring light to the darkest places. His voice faltered, and Sarah gently squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. Victoria and I had been in a loveless marriage for years. She was obsessed with status, with turning the small medical foundation I had created into an empire. But Catherine, she made me remember why I became a doctor in the first place. To help people, not to accumulate power. Sarah picked up her mother's journal, now a constant presence in her life. I found something here I want to share with you, she said, opening to a marked page. It's from when she found out she was pregnant. Thomas sat up straighter in his chair, his eyes gleaming with contained tears. Dear Journal, Sarah began to read, Today I saw our baby for the first time on the ultrasound. Thomas cried when we heard the heartbeat, that strong, determined sound, as if our little one already knew they would be loved beyond measure. We decided that if it's a girl, she will be named Sarah, after Thomas's grandmother. A name that carries history, love, and hope. A tear slipped down Thomas's face. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was the happiest moment of my life. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the moment. Sarah stood up, wiping her own eyes, and went to the door. It was Dr. Matthews, carrying a cardboard box that looked old. We found this in Victoria's old office at the hospital, he explained, stepping into the library. These are records she kept, about all the patients who, well. Sarah placed the box on the coffee table, her heart heavy with what they might find inside. Together, they began to examine its contents. Meticulously organized folders, each containing details about wealthy patients who had died under suspicious circumstances. She documented everything, Dr. Matthews murmured, horrified. Every death, every will altered, every penny siphoned off. At the bottom of the box, they found something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A small, empty vial with a partially removed label, dated the night Catherine died. Digitalis, Dr. Matthews read, his voice trembling. In high doses, it causes cardiac arrest. It looks like a natural heart attack. Thomas let out a distressed sound. The same thing she tried to use on me all those times she said I was having complications. Sarah held the vial with trembling hands, the reality of Victoria's cruelty hitting her like a punch to the gut. She planned everything, every detail. At that moment they heard footsteps in the hallway. Daniel, the family lawyer who had taken over the case after Victoria's arrest, entered the library with a grave expression. "Forgive the interruption," he said, "but we need to talk. Victoria is asking for a plea deal with the prosecution. She wants to speak about Catherine." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Sarah felt her world spin again, but this time it was different. She was no longer the orphan girl seeking answers. She was a strong woman, ready to face whatever truth came her way. "She wants to see me," Daniel continued, looking directly at Sarah. "She says there's something only you should know. Something about the night your mother died." Thomas held Sarah's hand tightly. "You don't have to go. You owe her nothing." But Sarah had already made her decision. In her heart, she knew she needed this final confrontation, this last piece of the puzzle to finally free herself from the past. "I have to go," she said softly. "For Mom. For everyone Victoria hurt. I need to look her in the eyes and show her she couldn't destroy us." At the state prison, the air was heavy with untold stories and silent regrets. Victoria waited in the visitation room, her expensive clothes replaced by the orange prison jumpsuit, her face a mask of false serenity. "Sarah, dear," Victoria smiled, that same calculated smile Sarah now knew so well. "I knew you'd come." "Say what you need to say, Victoria," Sarah responded, keeping her voice steady. "What else could you reveal about the night you killed my mother?" Victoria leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Your mother didn't die immediately, you know? After I administered the digitalis, she had enough strength to write one last letter. A letter I've kept all these years as insurance." Sarah's heart raced. "Where is it?" "The beach house," Victoria replied, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "The one Catherine and Thomas planned to escape to. Ironic, isn't it? The last piece of your mother's story, hidden in the place that should have been her happy home." Sarah felt the weight of that revelation like a physical blow. The beach house, the place her mother had mentioned so many times in her journal, the refuge that should have been their happy beginning. "Why are you telling me this now?" Victoria laughed, a sound empty of any humanity. "Because I want you to know that even now, even after everything, I still have power over this story. Your mother died alone, Sarah, thinking she failed to protect you. Her last words? Well, now you'll have to figure that out for yourself, won't you?" Sarah stood up, her legs trembling but her resolve unshaken. "You're wrong, Victoria. Mom didn't fail, she saved me. And now, I'm going to honor her sacrifice by making sure you pay for every life you've destroyed." Leaving the prison, Sarah called Thomas. "Dad, I need you to tell me about the beach house. We need to go there." The 2-hour drive along the coast was filled with stories, Thomas finally sharing every precious memory he had of Catherine. How she loved to walk along the beach at sunset, how they planned to raise Sarah in that house by the sea, away from Victoria's manipulations. The house was exactly as it had been in the photographs from the journal. A light blue wooden structure with a wraparound porch, large windows facing the ocean. The sound of the waves seemed to cradle secrets long kept. In the attic, among the dusty boxes of a life that never came to be, they found a yellowed envelope. Catherine's shaky handwriting was almost painful to see. My beloved Sarah, if you are reading this, you found your way back home. I want you to know that my last thoughts are of you. Victoria may have taken my life, but she will never erase the love I feel for you. Thomas, our sweet, gentle Thomas, he is your father, your anchor in this world. Protect him. Love him. Victoria will keep him imprisoned in lies, but I know one day you will free him. Do not carry the weight of my death, my love. Every choice I made was out of love. For you, for Thomas, for the truth. The life I dreamed for us three is in these walls, in this seaside place where we plan to be happy. Be strong, my Sarah. Be brave. But above all, be happy. True love always finds its way back home. Forever yours, Mom. Tears flowed freely down Sarah's face as she read her mother's final words. Thomas embraced her, father and daughter united in their pain and love. We'll restore this house, Sarah said softly. Turn it into the home she dreamed for us. A place of healing, of new beginnings. Thomas kissed her forehead, his eyes shining with tears and hope. Your mother always said that love builds bridges over the deepest abysses. She was right as always. And there, with the sound of the ocean as witness, Sarah finally felt complete. The circle was closing, not with vengeance or bitterness, but with love and forgiveness. Victoria had tried to destroy her family, but in the end, love had prevailed. The sunset painted the sky in golden hues as Sarah and Thomas stood on the beach house porch, the rhythmic sound of the waves rocking their reflections. Catherine's letter had changed everything, not only for what it revealed but for what it represented. A final act of love from a mother who sacrificed everything to protect her family. She used to sit right here, Thomas said softly, his hand gently caressing the weathered wood railing. She would spend hours planning what your room would look like, Sarah. The walls would be light blue, like the sky on a summer morning. There'd be a little library in the corner, filled with storybooks to read to you. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. They were no longer tears of pain, but of healing, of a circle that was finally closing. I found this among the boxes, she said, pulling a small object from her pocket. It was a handmade crib mobile with tiny stars and moons made of fabric. She made this while waiting for me, didn't she? Thomas took the mobile with trembling hands, his eyes shining with recognition. She worked on this for weeks. She said you'd be born under a starry sky, destined to light up the darkness. How right she was. At that moment, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Matthews. Victoria confessed everything. There will be no trial. She accepted the maximum sentence in exchange for revealing all the crimes of the Foundation. Sarah showed the message to Thomas, feeling an immense weight lift from her shoulders. It's really over, Dad. We can finally start living. Thomas hugged her, and in that embrace was the comfort of 20 years of repressed love. Your mother always said that true love has the power to heal all wounds. Even in the darkest hours, she never lost hope that one day you would find your way back home. Sarah gently pulled away, looking at the house that would be her new beginning. Let's turn this place into the home she dreamed of. Every room will be filled with the memories she wanted to create. And so, father and daughter began to plan. The sky blue room would become a reality. The library would be built. The garden Catherine had drawn in her journal would come to life, with the same flowers she had loved so much. The beach house, which had long held only ghosts of unfulfilled dreams, began to awaken with new life. The love Victoria had tried to destroy finally found its place in the sun. You know what else I found in the attic? Sarah asked, a small smile playing on her lips. She pulled an old camera from her bag. The film roll is still inside it. They're the last pictures Mom ever took. Thomas took the camera as if it were the most precious treasure. Together they decided to reveal the photographs, a final gift from Catherine, a last glimpse of the love that not even death could erase. And as the sun set on the horizon, father and daughter stood on the porch, united not only by blood but by a love that transcended time and pain. The ocean continued its eternal motion, its waves now cradling not secrets, but promises of a future lit by Catherine's love. The truth had finally found its way back home. The photographic development lab was bathed in a soft red light, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Sarah watched, her heart racing as the last photographs taken by her mother came to life before her eyes. Each image that emerged from the developing liquid felt like a whisper from the past, a message kept for 2 decades. She photographed everything, Thomas whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The documents, the forged records, the fake prescriptions. The truth was unfolding image by image. Catherine had not only discovered Victoria's crimes, She had methodically documented each piece of evidence, creating a photographic archive that would be impossible to refute. The last photos on the roll showed pages of financial records, altered medical prescriptions, and something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A series of photographs from Victoria's office, showing her preparing syringes with digitalis. She knew she was in danger, Sarah murmured, her hands trembling as she held the still wet photographs. She documented everything as insurance, in case something happened to her. Thomas's phone rang, breaking the solemn silence of the lab. It was Daniel, the lawyer. Victoria wants to make a full confession, he informed, his voice tense. But she has one condition: she wants to speak only with Sarah. She says there's something only you should know about the night Catherine died. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. When? Now. She's not doing well. The prison doctors say she had a collapse after seeing the photos we found at the beach house. Thomas gripped Sarah's hand tightly. You don't need to go. We already have all the evidence we need. But Sarah knew she needed this final confrontation. I need to look her in the eyes one last time, Dad. I need to understand. The state prison looked even darker at night. Victoria was in the infirmary, a shadow of the formidable woman she used to be. Her face was marked not only by age but by the crushing weight of guilt. You look so much like her, Victoria said as Sarah entered, her voice barely a hoarse whisper. You have the same determined eyes, the same eyes that have haunted me for 20 years. Why did you ask to see me? Victoria closed her eyes, tears running down her weathered face. Because I need you to know the whole truth. Not just about how your mother died, but why. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victoria continued, each word seeming to take an immense effort. I couldn't have children. The doctor said it was impossible. Thomas, he didn't know. I kept it a secret, built my life around other ambitions. Power, money, control, they were substitutes for what I could never have. She paused, her breathing irregular. When Catherine got pregnant, something inside me broke. It wasn't just Thomas's love she had stolen, it was the dream I would never realize. Watching you grow in her belly, every smile of hers, every moment of happiness felt like a knife in my heart. So you decided to destroy us, Sarah said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. I was already destroyed, Victoria replied, a bitter smile on her lips. The money laundering, the deaths in the hospitals, it all started before her. It was my empire built with blood and lies. Catherine found everything out, but that wasn't what sealed her fate. Victoria leaned forward, her words now barely a whisper. The night she died, Catherine came to confront me. Not about the money or the crimes. She came to offer me forgiveness. She said she understood my pain, that we could find a way to be a family, all of us together. Tears now flowed freely down Victoria's face. But I couldn't accept forgiveness. I couldn't accept her compassion. It was easier to destroy than to admit my own weakness. That night, Victoria continued, her voice breaking under the weight of the memories, your mother showed me a photograph. It was you, still in the womb from the last ultrasound. She said, this baby could also be your daughter, Victoria. Love has room for all of us. Sarah felt the tears running down her face, imagining her mother, even in the face of danger, trying to build bridges where others would see only walls. But then why? Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. If she offered forgiveness, why did you? Because forgiveness was more painful than hatred, Victoria replied, her gaze lost in distant memories. When Catherine offered me that chance for redemption, I realized I had become a monster. And sometimes it's easier to keep being the monster than to face what we've become. Victoria pulled a crumpled envelope from beneath the pillow. I found this hidden among the pages of her diary after everything happened. I never had the courage to destroy it, but I also never had the courage to read it. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. It was a letter written in her mother's delicate handwriting. Dear Victoria, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I want you to know that I understand your pain. The inability to give life does not make you any less of a woman, or any less worthy of love. True maternal love doesn't come from blood, but from the heart. Sarah could have two mothers, one who carried her in her womb and another who would help her grow. We could have been a different kind of family, but still a family. Do not let fear and bitterness poison your heart. There is still time to choose love. With hope, Catherine. Victoria was now sobbing openly. 20 years carrying this weight. I destroyed not just your family, Sarah, but any chance of redemption for myself. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mother's words. Catherine had seen humanity where everyone else saw only evil. She had offered love where others would have offered only judgment. "There's something else you need to know," Victoria whispered, her voice weak. "The night when it all happened, Catherine didn't die immediately. She had time to write one last message. It's hidden." At that moment, the monitors began beeping frantically. The medical team rushed into the room, pushing Sarah out as they tried to stabilize Victoria. "Code Blue. We need immediate assistance." Sarah watched through the infirmary window, her heart racing. Victoria's last words echoed in her mind, a final message from her mother, still hidden somewhere. Her phone vibrated. It was Thomas. "Daughter, I found something in Victoria's old room. You need to see this. Now." As Sarah ran to her car, the night sky lit up with distant lightning. A storm was approaching, as if the universe itself was responding to the intensity of the revelations of that night. What had Thomas found? What was Catherine's final message? And more importantly, after so much hatred and pain, could redemption be found in the fragments of a shattered family? The answer awaited Sarah at the Harrison mansion, where Thomas held a small music box that would change everything they thought they knew about that fateful final night. The Harrison mansion was silent when Sarah arrived, the storm now roaring at full force outside. Thomas was waiting for her in Victoria's old room, sitting on the edge of the bed with a small music box in his trembling hands. The object, delicate and old, seemed out of place among the luxurious items that still filled the room. "I found this hidden at the bottom of her closet," Thomas explained softly. "I recognized it immediately. It was Catherine's. She always kept it on her nightstand at the hospital." Sarah approached slowly, as if fearing the moment would shatter with any sudden movement. The music box was simple, made of light wood with small flowers carved into the lid. "She used to say she kept her most precious secrets here," Thomas continued, his voice choked with emotion. "She said that one day when you were older the box would be yours." With infinite care, Sarah picked up the box. As she opened it, a soft melody filled the room, the same lullaby Catherine used to sing for her patients, the same one that had touched Thomas's heart so many years ago. But there was something different. The velvet lining of the box seemed slightly misaligned. Sarah gently removed it, revealing a secret compartment. Inside, she found a small flash drive and a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. "My beloved Sarah, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found your way back home. This music box was my companion for years at the hospital, a silent witness to so many stories of life and death. Now it holds my final story. On the flash drive, you will find the complete truth about Victoria's crimes, every document, every piece of evidence I gathered. But more important than that, you will also find my memories, my dreams for you, the love I could never express personally. Victoria came to see me tonight. I tried to show her that there was still hope, that forgiveness could be stronger than hatred. I saw a moment of hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of humanity, but then fear won. As I write these words, I know my time is short. Digitalis is already coursing through my veins, one last gift from Victoria. But I do not die with hatred in my heart. I die knowing that one day you will uncover the truth, and when that happens, I hope you will find in your heart the same capacity for forgiveness that I am trying to offer now. Thomas, my love, I know you will find a way through the darkness that Victoria will create. Keep the memory of our love alive, not with bitterness but with hope. Our Sarah will be the light that guides you back. Sarah, my little star, always remember, true power is not in revenge but in love. Victoria chose the path of fear, but you can choose differently. Be the person who can see beyond appearances, who offers compassion even when others would choose hatred. The love I feel for both of you is greater than any darkness, stronger than any poison. It will live through you, Sarah, in every act of kindness, in every moment of forgiveness. Until we meet again. With eternal love, Mom. Sarah let the tears fall freely as the melody of the music box continued to play. Thomas embraced her, father and daughter united in their pain and healing. At that moment the phone rang. It was from the prison hospital. Victoria had gone into a coma, her last words a plea for forgiveness. Sarah looked at the letter in her hands, at the music box that still played softly, and finally understood. Her mother had left more than evidence and revelations. She had left a legacy of love and forgiveness that transcended pain and revenge. Aquí está tragiceo com os paragrafos especados. The storm outside was beginning to subside, and through the dissipating clouds, the first rays of dawn began to appear. A new day was born, bringing with it the promise of healing and a fresh start. Catherine's love had found its way through time, stronger than hatred, more enduring than revenge. And in that music box, in a melody that echoed through the years, her message of love and forgiveness would live on forever. 3 months had passed since the night of the storm. The beach house, once a silent witness to interrupted dreams, now pulsed with new life. Sarah stood watching the sunset from the same porch where her mother used to sit, the sound of the waves bringing a peace she never thought possible. The nursery that Catherine had dreamed of had been transformed into a cozy library, its walls painted in the same sky blue shade she had described in her diary. Photographs filled the shelves, frozen moments in time that told the story of a love greater than life itself. Catherine smiling in her nurse's uniform, Thomas holding her hand during a picnic in the park, old ultrasound pictures where Sarah was just a promise of life. "The coffee's ready," Thomas said softly, bringing 2 steaming cups to the porch. Since he had begun to recover from years of forced sedation, his face had regained color and life. The sparkle in his eyes more and more resembled the man in the old photographs, the one who had fallen madly in love with a nurse with a gentle smile. "We received a letter from the hospital today," Sarah commented, gently blowing on her coffee. "Victoria?" Thomas took her hand, offering silent support. Victoria had passed away in prison 2 weeks after falling into a coma, her last conscious act being the full confession of her crimes. Justice had been served, but not in the way Sarah had initially imagined. "Acquiesced o texto com os paragrafos pecados." "You know, Dad," she continued, watching the seagulls dance on the horizon, "for a long time I thought that when this moment came, when Victoria finally paid for everything, I would feel satisfaction, revenge. But all I feel is peace." Thomas smiled softly. "Your mother would be proud. She always believed that forgiveness was more powerful than revenge." Sarah took the music box from her coat pocket. She rarely went anywhere without it now. As she opened it, the sweet melody blended with the sound of the waves, creating a symphony of healing and new beginnings. "Dr. Matthews called yesterday," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "The pediatric wing of the hospital is going to be renamed in Mom's honor. The Catherine Parker Care Center. A place where sick children will receive not only medical treatment but also the kind of love and compassion she always offered her patients." Thomas wiped away a tear that had slipped down his face. "She always said that a hospital shouldn't just be a place for physical healing, but a place for healing the soul. And that's why I've made a decision," Sarah continued, her voice firm yet gentle. "I'm going back to school. I want to specialize in pediatric oncology. To carry on her legacy in a way she would have been proud of." Thomas's smile lit up his entire face. "You're already so much like her, not just in looks but in heart." Catherine always looked beyond the pain, beyond the suffering. She saw the possibility for love where others only saw darkness. Sarah took out a photograph she always carried with her. The last one Catherine had taken, showing her and Thomas on the porch of this very house, their faces radiant with the promise of a future that never came to be. "But it did happen, Dad," she whispered as if answering his unspoken thoughts. "In a different way, in a different time, but it happened. We're here together exactly where she dreamed we would be. Acquiesced a tragiceo do texto para o inglés americano, com espacamento entre os paragrafos." The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside the house's library, the books Catherine had chosen for her unborn daughter still waited on the shelves, fairy tales, stories of love and courage, narratives of forgiveness and redemption. Sarah opened her mother's diary one last time, flipping to the page she had memorized but never grew tired of reading. "True love is like the ocean, my little Sarah. Sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always, always deep and eternal. No matter how much time passes, no matter how many storms come, it always finds its way back home." The music box continued its sweet melody, rocking father and daughter as they watched the first stars appear in the night sky. The circle was complete. Love had conquered hate. The truth had set free not only the living but also the dead. And somewhere, Catherine was smiling, knowing her sacrifice had not been in vain. Her family was finally reunited, her love had found its way through time, and her daughter had learned the most important of all lessons, that true power does not lie in revenge, but in the ability to forgive, to love, to begin again. The wind gently blew, bringing with it the scent of the garden flowers, the same flowers Catherine had planted so many years ago, now blooming once again, a living testament that love, true and pure, never really dies. It only waits for the right moment to bloom again. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the Life Stories channel. Your comments mean a lot to us. Let us know what you thought of this journey of love, forgiveness and redemption. With your support, we can continue bringing stories that touch the heart and make us believe in the transformative power of love. See you in the next story.